MTV World Stage представляет
September meets us not only with burning fires of mountain ash, but also with the first big AAA project, Marvel's Avengers. We'll tell you what you can do with yourself in the new game service, who Kamala Khan is and why you shouldn't rush to buy the game at the start yet. Marvel's Avengers is a new service game in which the player can try on the role of one of the superheroes of the Marvel Universe. The plot of the game starts on the day of the celebration of the launch of the SHIELD flying ship at the updated reactor. The events are so important to the game's universe that a local Comic-Con with the participation of real Avengers gathers around the vessel. A peaceful celebration, M-Day, is thwarted by the invasion of the villainous mercenary Taskmaster, who distracts the Avengers from the ship. However, things go downhill not only for the heroes, but also for the bad guys. On the ship on which Captain America was fighting off Taskmaster's soldiers, an experimental reactor explodes. Rogers does not have time to escape, part of New York is destroyed, and terrigenous fog flows into the streets, leading to the mutation of civilians, who will later be called non-humans. Everything is so bad that the Avengers no longer want to be heroic, and instead of the headquarters of the team in the center of the city, the headquarters of the AIM Corporation appears under the leadership of George Tarleton, who was injured in the explosion. And 5 years after the tragedy, the story of a new hero, Ms. Marvel, begins. If you were going to buy the game for the sake of the plot with the participation of the very Avengers, who fell in love with the films, then you should be prepared for the fact that they do not play primary roles in the plot. Instead of revealing Cap, Thor, Hulk, Widow and Iron Man, the Crystal Dynamics writers focused on the story of Kamala Khan, the new Ms. Marvel. In fact, there is so much of it in the game that it would be enough for a separate subtitle in the title of the game. Kamala, when compared to the classic Avengers lineup, is a yellow chick. She received her own series of comics only in 2014, becoming one of the successful characters of the new wave of Marvel. This was due to the creative authorship, who competently combined the classic elements of superheroics with the peculiarities of the life of a Muslim family from New York and teenage experiences familiar to a wide range of readers under the cover. Actually, in the game itself, many aspects of the original comics, albeit in a very loose retelling and with a grain of understatement, are still there. There was a place for Kamala's relatives, cultural references, her costume is a Muslim tracksuit, and the heroine's love for superheroes. The last one in the game with a lot of excess. Even after the tipping point of Marvel's Avengers, Kamala still acts like a fan among her idols. True, she was still lucky to get some kind of story arc, albeit half non-working. For example, Thor turned out to be a charger on legs, literally playing the role of a god from a car, or rather from a coffee shop. And for some reason, Tony Stark was forced to experience two key moments of the movie Iron Man. We will not specify which ones, otherwise there will be spoilers. As in the comics, Kamala becomes an Inhuman, official translation of Inhuman, under the influence of terrigenous fog. Her superpower is polymorphism. Simply put, Kamala is capable of changing the shape of the body, stretching her arms and legs, expanding her fists to the size of cars and growing to the level of a two-story building in a second. The talent is unusual, but Crystal Dynamics has perfectly managed to bring it into the game. As an old cartoon character, the heroine can clap comically large hands, reach 10 meters to the target and send bad guys with a kick of a monstrous boot into the sky. Kamala's basic combos look very fresh and unusual, especially against the background of the Widow, shooting with two hands and trying not to die in the battle with robots and super soldiers. Yes, and the active abilities of Ms. Marvel are such that even the Hulk will envy. She can both restore part of her health to herself and the team, and push enemies with her palm away from herself with colossal damage, and impose a temporary increase in attacks on herself. In terms of gameplay, playing as Kamala is a genuine pleasure. Even after the credits, the author of the review began further pumping it was Ms. Marvel, and not someone more eminent from the golden composition of the Avengers. Although you can't say that the rest of the Avengers turned out to be boring. The combat system in Marvel's Avengers is perhaps the best part of the game. With such a variety of heroes, everyone has their own unique fighting style, techniques and role in the team. The captain deftly knocks down several enemies with a shield throw. Hulk smashes Thor summons lightning bolts and hurls Mjolnir like Kratos with his enchanted axe. The Widow attacks while invisible and takes out the AIM robots with electromagnetic charges. It's a pity, only there are no command ultimates. On our streams of Marvel's Spider-Man, readers wondered whether it was worth taking the game if they were only interested in its storyline campaign. Unfortunately, in terms of history, Crystal Dynamics could not reach the level of even the most average movie from the MCU. Chemistry and dynamics within the squad almost absent in both cutscenes and missions. And the problem is not only in the script, but also in the animations. Even in the most dramatic cutscenes, the characters' faces struggle to cope with basic emotions like surprise or sadness. If you've played Marvel's Spider-Man, then you probably remember the storm of emotions that Parker experienced when Otto Octavius demonstrated his invention of his life. The surprise on the hero's face gave way to delight. The teacher, who was everything to him, finally achieved his dream. But then the excitement was supplanted by anxiety and fear for Otto's health, in whose behavior his dark side began to manifest. Unfortunately, there are no such scenes in Marvel's Avengers. Everyone except Kamala, 5 years after the tragedy, has not changed in any way. Switching between the Avengers were in the past, we are to blame for everything, at the snap of fingers changes to, so why did we go our separate ways 5 years ago? Bruce Banner gets a pinch of conflict, but it is not enough to really push the heroes against each other. Bruce sticks to his point of view on M-Day, and then decides that it is worth not changing anything and joining the Avengers again. Jokes. They are in the game. Some of them quote literally those that were in the movies. But they do not cause anything but awkwardness.
If in the film adaptation from the Russo brothers in 2 hours Tony Stark could give out so many bobs that even the most restrained viewer laughed with at least one of them, then after 8 hours of playing the Marvel's Avengers campaign, it was hard for me to remember if I smiled at least once.
Out-of-plot cutscenes don't hold up to scrutiny. Sims may suddenly forget to open their mouths while their glassy eyes are staring into nothingness. And the camera is usually set up as if someone was recording the meeting of the Avengers from around the corner. For some reason, Crystal Dynamics decided to repeat the formula of the one-time villain from the Marvel films, forgetting that for a big superhero game it would be nice to have at least 5 iconic bad guys. Instead, here are multicolored robots, large and smaller. The only joy in the story mode is that Crystal Dynamics learned to do while working on the restart of Lara Croft. It's about bright shoots from someone or something. Plus, before the final, the team was able to raise the degree of epic and lead the entire squad of Avengers against the main villain of the whole game, Modok. Unfortunately, the best moments of the story are mixed with repetitive missions from free play and battles with plain bosses or loader robots.
But still, we have a service game in which the player chops not so much for the sake of the plot, as for the sake of the possibility of pumping for hundreds of hours, collecting imbi sets and rare skins.
Another question that flashed in the chat during our Marvel's Avengers broadcast was, is it worth taking the game if you want something in the spirit of Destiny, but with the participation of superheroes? The beauty of Destiny, in my opinion, is the variety of post-story content that motivates you to continue playing. Raids, Gambit mode, PvE and V activities, as well as interesting tasks for unlocking the rarest guns, all this does not let you get bored after the credits. And the levels in the game are quite inventive, both in terms of structure and in terms of the visual component. In Marvel's Avengers, after the credits, the author of these lines could not come up with a decent motivation to continue playing. All tasks that are proposed to be completed in dozens on the world map are incredibly routine activities that differ little from the content shown in story missions. No unique bosses, no new places on the map, forests, mountains, permafrost and futuristic AIM laboratories. True, there is a separate chain of hero missions for each of the Avengers. But their quality is depressing. They are distinguished from other points on the map by the presence of a briefing and a couple of lines of dialogues during the task. Is there something about Marvel's Avengers that is fun to discover? Let's say alternative costumes are the most primitive that comes to mind. But they turned out to be very unconvincing. Event Spider, from Insomniac Games. Literally every outfit Parker wanted to get into the collection. Then in Marvel's Avengers, even the legendary variations of jewelry look frighteningly uninteresting. Here, instead of iconic images from comics or movies, 30 equals varieties of multicolored t-shirts, pants and panties. Content for high-level heroes.
It differs little from ordinary trips to the forest, tundra, city or mountains for boxes with 10 kinds of resources.
Boss battles that weren't in the campaign. Also no. At most you will meet Taskmaster or Abomination, which took 5 minutes of screen time in the story. But in the open world, they become ordinary bosses and sponges for damage. Maybe pumping factions. If only for the sake of platinum. Or if you like to walk very leisurely in the hub zones, accepting the same requests to eliminate 20 aim soldiers. Coupled with long loads between levels in the hub zone, you don't want to appear from the word at all. But what about the player's desire to pump battle passes for each of the Avengers? And then buy. The rewards in them are boring, some emotions, you can only equip one, and icons for the profile with rare costumes. By the way, if you wish, you can buy any item from the Hero Battle Pass by throwing in some real money for a bag of special game currency. The only hope is for additions that will gradually be added to the game. They will have to expand the universe of the game, and bring new activities to the map, and introduce the player to new heroes and villains. The studio is already preparing a sequel with the participation of Hawkeye and his assistant, Katie Bishop. The worst thing that can happen to any game is technical problems at the start. The editors received a version of the game for PC, it was launched on the basic version of the console. There are small bloopers in Marvel's Avengers. For example, Kamala's hair would periodically disappear in cutscenes. Occasionally the sound stuck, and the enemy's suicide phrase could echo until the very end of the mission. Russian localization seemed to become quieter and louder. However, these are trifles. But there are those that interfere with the game. In particular, terrible frame drops during massive fights. The game suddenly turns into a blurry slideshow show, which can be stopped if you quickly defeat at least a couple of enemies. What is fan service in superhero games? Alternative costumes, references to events from comics, recognizable images, and also villains, who are opposed by heroes under the player's control. Unfortunately, the game's Avengers follow the patterns of the movies. There is one well-known comedian villain and a couple of lower-ranked villains for the entire game. MODOK looks intimidating, mutations in the body make his head canonical. This is where the Crystal Dynamics designers should be given credit. The studio has done 100% adapting the villain's unusual proportions. That's just like the overwhelming number of bad guys in the Maku. MODOK is needed only for an epic denouement and sluggish attempts to bring discord to the team of heroes. The rest of the bosses in the game can be counted on one hand. The most annoying thing is that already at the beta stage, players saw 1/3 of them. The rest is the plain bosses and loaders. That's right, this is far from a story-driven single-player game. But doesn't the service model free its hands to add a bunch of petty supervillains? It is possible that they will appear a little later. In the meantime, Avengers, get ready to battle mechanical monsters. Some of the fears that arose during the open beta testing were confirmed. Even after the patches on the base piece, Marvel's Avengers is technically imperfect, and the backbone of the tasks in free play becomes boring very quickly. True, we have no doubt that Marvel's Avengers will form a loyal audience of its own. At the time of the beta, 6 million people came to pass a small fragment from the game. And even now, after the start of early access, not the most demanding players share much warmer reviews than the author of these lines, a bore of the 100th level. We hope that in a few months after the start, the Crystal Dynamics project will get rid of some of the problems and be filled with interesting stories and dangerous villains.